Hello guys, my name is Hugo, I'm Los Angeles based cinematographer, and it's been a while. So, I bought an ARRI Alexa 35. So long story short, it's been quite a big deal for me to get a camera like this, and I've been looking to some options to invest in a camera that will last a while and hopefully will get a good investment return. I've been looking at all possible options, and probably three the most interesting options were Alexa Mini LF, Venice 2, and Alexa 35. All those cameras are great, but let me explain why I went with Alexa 35. Sony Venice 2 is a very tempting option considering what it's capable of. But as an investment, I see what happened to Venice 1. Since Venice 2 came out, the prices on Venice 1 dropped so bad that right now you can pick a very good package with reality and stuff, for like 35k, which is pretty crazy. And for those reasons, this probably was the biggest downside for me investing in Sony cameras. Where, for instance, Alexa Mini LF, it came out almost 7 years ago, and the price for it since it came out was 75 grand. And right now, when you go look for a used one, you're gonna find used options in a very good condition, but still about 64 to 74,000, which is pretty crazy the way ARRI cameras hold their value. But since Mini LF came out in 2015, it's very apparent that in Los Angeles, for instance, every rental house has lots of them, and it's really hard to compete with such a big amount of cameras. Where Alexa 35 is a relatively new camera, and still there is not many of these cameras on the market. And considering that it's ARRI's new flagman, featuring the new, completely new sensor, I think this camera will last for a while. I've had this camera for about 2 months now, and I recently shot a feature film on it, and shooting a feature film, it's probably the best scenario to test cameras, to test it in Battlefield. If you follow my channel or my Instagram, you probably know that I've tested all kinds of cameras and I've shot pretty much with all cameras out there. So I have a good understanding of what cameras are these days, and quite honestly, lately it's been really hard to surprise me with something because all modern cameras are pretty damn good. And quite honestly, in the recent days, there wasn't really crazy, innovative, revolutionary change in imagery apart from Sony's FX3, FX6, and A7S III low light capabilities. But oh boy, this camera has impressed me with its dynamic range. It's just bananas. I mean, just so you get an idea, I when I just got this camera, I started testing it to see what it's capable of, and I pointed to my backyard at day, and it was a sunny day, and I didn't use any filters. It was clear ND, and it was ISO 800. It was 24 FPS. It was 180 shutter speed, and my T-stop was at 4. And to my surprise, it didn't peak in any highlights. So I looked at my false color, and it was everything within the range. I could pull all the data from it, which is pretty crazy because you see the image on the screen, it's all white, and you're basically able to pull everything down, which I've never seen on any cameras, anything like this.
So check this out. 800 ISO, no NDs. 2.8. Bright windows outside. Nothing speaking.
And if it's not impressive, I don't know what is. Dynamic range of film on film cameras has always been a standard for filmmakers. And quite honestly, the dynamic range in digital cameras has been exceeded of film dynamic range since 2009, since first Alexa came out. But the thing is about digital sensors dynamic range, it's mostly in the shadows, where still like in the highlights, film was dominating the market, and whoever loves filming on film, they always say that even though on paper dynamic range on digital sensors is wider than on film, it's still like many people who shoot on film, cinematographers, my friends and all that, they still preferred film because you can pull so much in the highlights. So most of the dynamic range in film is in the highlights. So with this camera, basically what they achieved, they give you the dynamic range of highlights of the film and dynamic range of the digital sensors. So it gives you the best of the both worlds. When I was filming this feature film, there wasn't a single time when I pushed it to a moment where my highlights were overexposed, and I had all kind of scenarios. I had very dark scenarios, very bright scenarios. I had lots of filming where I'm filming from inside and it's very dark inside and very bright outside, and there wasn't a single time where the camera would, I don't know, wash out the whites in the outside. And sometimes like I was like even like before I set up any lights, I was setting up camera. There was a shot in the store where I had huge windows and I was kind of dark inside, and I was filming towards the windows, and even before I set up any lights, I was really surprised because I set my exposure to whatever I like to be inside on people, on the actors. And to my surprise, when I clicked on false color, the outside wasn't picking at all. So it held all the information, you know. And when you're using lights, it's just probably impossible to make this camera to overexpose. And you can look up dynamic range tests online. I've found some really cool tests on the Vimeo where they test this camera against Alexa Mini LF, Sony Venice 2, and this camera just destroys them in terms of highlight retention. Like all those overexposing tests, it's just killing them. And when I looked at marketing videos from ARRI when this camera came out, on their videos you can't really tell if the dynamic range really is different from previous cameras. You know, it looked to me, to my eye, it looked the same as previous cameras, and I wasn't really sure like what have they really changed. But from the moment you start using this camera, instantly you get the idea how powerful the sensor is. And not only that, you know, not only dynamic range impressed me, you know, the camera itself is very consistent. You know, like when you film narrative stuff and you film a scene, you can spend a lot of time, half a day, sometimes a day, on a scene. And when you do like coverage, you do different angles, you do different time of the day, you do different lighting setups, and you're trying to match everything so it looks the same. And to my surprise, we had one day when we shot half a day and the light has changed drastically, and I had to change my exposure to compensate, you know. And when you push this camera, overexpose, underexpose, overall, like pushing the image, it doesn't really change. It stays consistent, which is really, really important, you know, like, so you don't have to have a lot of headache trying to do color grade and color match to the rest of the shots. Another thing that really surprised me, and I quite honestly, again, didn't really expect much from what ARRI, when they advertised their enhanced sensitivity, so-called low light mode. And when I was filming the feature, we had a scene, and I wasn't gonna use this enhanced sensitivity mode ISO, which starts from 2560 up to 6400. And I had a scenario when we were filming outside and it was night and we had to lead like a park, street on the park. And we didn't have enough time to light it properly. So I decided to push lights further away and I decided to give a go to this enhanced sensitivity mode. And I changed it to the lowest 2560, and I looked in the monitor on a screen and I didn't see any noise, so I decided, okay, I'm gonna go and check on a bigger monitor, and I had a production monitor 25-inch and I looked at it and I didn't see any noise. The image almost looked the same with the standard 800 ISO. So I shot on this and to my surprise the image looked great, and it saved so much time, to light all this kind of stuff. Next day, I had another night scenario and I pushed this camera to 3200, and still the image looked great. And there was one scenario when I had to push the camera to 6400 where we almost had zero lights, only like some distant street lights, so I had to push camera that far. And again, it had some noise, but it wasn't too bad. The noise looked more like film gray like noise, so it wasn't bad at all. But just so you understand, like Venice 1 became famous because it had this dual ISO, and the second ISO was 2560, somewhere about that, and basically this camera has that. And I confidently can say that you can easily shoot at 2560 up to probably 3200 easily without really compromising on the image quality. And that opens absolutely different new possibilities that you weren't able to do with ARRI cameras before. And lastly, also one of my favorite features of this camera is the textures. And at first it seemed like a gimmick, but trust me, it's not. And I use those textures a lot, and specifically I liked nostalgic and soft nostalgic, which basically adds a grain to your image. But the way it applies the grain, it's not like generic film grain that you apply on post. It works in some smart way where it affects differently highlights and shadows, and it looks really organic, and it looks like a real film. And the way it works, it bakes the grain somewhere early on early stages of image processing, because even if you shoot in RAW, you still have this gain and you can't remove it. It's kind of a commitment, but I kind of like it a lot. After this feature film, my friend, my girlfriend who worked on me on this film, said one thing that I liked a lot. He said that it seems like big production studio films don't really need to have cameras like this, because they have time and they have lights and all kind of stuff that they can actually pull it off with any cameras, where low budget projects actually are in need of cameras like this, something really powerful, because sometimes you get in situations when you don't have time, don't have enough lights and all that kind of stuff, where you have to rely more on camera, so the camera can actually pull some things for you. And in my scenario, this camera actually helped me to achieve some stunning images without excess of lights. So I hope this information was useful for you. Thank you for your time, and don't forget to subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.